Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're super excited to be here with you. As a quick word of introduction, Rupa, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Rupa Chaturvedi. I currently lead the merchant and ads design team at Uber. And my background has been in product and UX design. I've worked with several startups as well as large organizations, including Amazon and Google, helping them launch 0 to 1 products and specific focus on the emerging technology area. So think augmented reality, think conversational AI. My focus has primarily been in the e-commerce marketplaces and retail space. Super excited to be hanging out with you this morning.
And my name is Polly Allen. I've been in the tech field for over 20 years. I started my career in the software engineering space as a software developer and software engineering leader before moving into product management about 10 years ago. Most recently, I've been a principal product manager at Amazon's Alexa AI. In 2020, I led the team that launched the very first generative AI answers on Alexa. So it was the first time we didn't know exactly what Alexa was going to say. I left big tech in 2022 to go help more people with more diverse backgrounds get into careers at AI. So I have my own company as well, AI Career Boost, where I also do consulting to try and stay on top of the latest trends in generative AI. So today's agenda, we are going to keep it pretty short and sweet because I know there's a lot of burning questions about the space of how AI is different from traditional processes. But Rupa's going to walk us through the differences in AI product design, and then I'll be walking through the differences in data and engineering considerations. And we'll wrap up with a Q&A. As Eleanor mentioned, please keep that in the Q&A window and upvote the questions you're most interested in hearing answers to at the end of our session.
All right. So let's start talking about users and the user experience when it comes to AI product and design. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off with sharing some few examples of where we see a lot of AI adoption and proliferation. So think of question answering, where your AI chatbot or a virtual assistant is helping your customers or users basically get answers to certain questions. So you might have a pool of repository of data, and the AI is basically just processing natural language queries and being able to provide answers to users. And that basically forms the foundation of a conversational UX, where the user wants to frame a question and the AI is able to respond in a contextual manner. Personalized recommendations are also a very popular use case, where users are looking for booking trips or purchasing shopping items, and they're looking for more and more personalized recommendations, which saves them a lot of time and number of steps as they are going through their shopping journey. In that scenario as well, you are interacting with a personal assistant, a shopping assistant, what do we call it, and providing them with inputs, and the AI is responding back with contextual response. So there's a lot of back and forth happening between the user and the AI. Summarization is another popular use case, where you are asking questions or you're asking for summaries, where AI is parsing through vast amounts of data and giving you the TLDR version. And that also requires, which we're calling today prompt engineering, that also requires users to be able to shape their query in a way that the AI can parse and then give a response to you that is contextual to your query. And knowledge retrieval, again, being able to pull out specific pieces of knowledge, whether it is databases or it is lots of document and knowledge that resides within an organization. You're trying to pull out the most relevant piece of information, and that requires some back and forth between the user and the AI. These are some very popular applications of AI today, and you will see several examples, whether it is B2C. So we're seeing these in shopping, scenarios. We're seeing these in travel booking, even food delivery, for example. And we've got more generic assistants like Copilot, for example, or Google Assistant, Alexa, Rufus now from Amazon, which are all more generic assistants that are helping you with either summarization, knowledge retrieval, or helping you perform a certain task. In each of these scenarios, the process of designing the user experience and building the product would be a very different experience than how you have been doing things today, whether you're building a web or a mobile application. So we can touch upon a few areas that differentiate these two processes. We can't cover everything, so we'll just touch upon the most important ones. So if you were to think of this visually as a traditional product or UX designer, you would be thinking of providing a linear user journey with lots of wireframes and step-by-step guides. So here are some, affordances on the screen. You click on this button, you go to this page, and then you can go to drill down to the more deeper level pages. These are very traditional constructs of how you would build any software application today, whether it's web or mobile. But with AI, you're basically expecting that the user would choose their own direction. And you have to preempt all these possibilities, and then it just becomes a maze where it's literally a choose your own adventure, even no matter what your use case is. So we talked about so many different examples. Irrespective of what your use case is, you're thinking about something that seems less predictable, an experience that is non-linear, and you have to preempt a lot of different scenarios as to which the user is going to navigate your experience. So gone are the days where you can use just a click-through prototype or a step-by-step user experience flow and say, I think this is what I'm offering the user, and most likely they're going to stick to this golden path. In the case of AI, you're trying to preempt and understand what are the different possible paths the user can take, and I need to work backwards from there. So to be able to start building and designing AI products, you have to start shifting your mental model from a traditional linear user journey to a more non-linear, organic, and a bit more messier user journey. So let's go deeper into the conversational UX space and tie it back to the examples we talked about. In this scenario, you're thinking about human-to-human interactions, where you're having a conversation, someone asks a question, the other person responds, and you go back and forth. It's called multi-turn conversational experiences. You want the person who's talking to you to remember what you just said. So if I'm asking Polly, hey, how's the weather in Seattle? And she says it's rainy. And the next question is, are you going for a hike? I'm like, no, but it's raining. I can't go for a hike. But if I had forgotten that, Polly said it was raining, I would feel weird. Like, hey, I just told you this. How are you forgetting? So maintaining that context is super important. And so in the context of human-to-human interactions, you're remembering what the person said to you. You are responding in a contextual way. There is back and forth. It's not a command where say, Polly, do this. And that's not how human-to-human interactions work. We're having a conversation. We're expecting some back and forth, and we're expecting context to be maintained. That itself, if you go back to the visuals that I showed you, to do that for any different scenario that the user might choose gets super complex very quickly. You have to preempt the user response because it is natural language and you're enabling the user to provide their query in any format that they think is natural to them. You have to start thinking about how the user would respond to the AI response. How would they form their initial query? What might they want to do next? So all of these different scenarios need to be mapped out, which is why it gets that super complex journey. You need to start thinking about semantic relationships. So users might say the same thing differently because we are not providing them with a search button, or we're not providing them with download button. So that CTA is very clear to the user. If I click on this button, this is what it does. This is what I should expect. In AI experiences, you are enabling the user to form their query and choose whichever direction they want to go to. And they might end up doing that in different ways. So it's not limited to the UI affordances that you have created, which means that Polly might say, I want to search for the best women's running shoes. And I might say, give me your best recommendations for running shoes. And Eleanor might say, find me, running shoes. And we're all trying to say the same thing. We want to search for the top rated women's running shoes, but we're using different words and different language to do that. And so you as the designer and the product manager need to start thinking about how do we start understanding the semantic relationships of find and browse and get and search, and all of those basically mean we need to search for this item. And so that is a nuance of AI design, which doesn't exist in traditional UXs, where you are very clear, I want you to just say search, and here's the button, and it always says search, and everybody understands what the user is trying to do. So that's a pretty important nuanced difference there. The failure cases could be unpredictable just because the user might choose to type something that the AI cannot support or does not understand, or the way the user framed the query just broke the entire UX. And so you cannot envision a lot of the failure cases in this scenario, and it becomes very hard to then create a delightful, engaging UX. And so that extra nuance is there, where you are thinking about all the different possible scenarios that the user might query or provide incomplete information that might impact their user experience. And finally, personality. A lot of traditional AI assistants that you have seen. So we can think of Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant. I think Bing Copilot is also in that category, where they're trying to create a personality, a unique identity, and creating that voice and tone that help reflect your company's brand identity, and personality kind of takes on its own shape in terms of, hey, is my AI assistant witty and friendly, and does it have sense of humor, which is what we saw with Alexa a lot. And so those are nuances to think about as you are building your AI product. Moving forward to here is the key difference here. When you are building a traditional product, you have a pretty set path for the user to follow. The user could choose different options, but they are pretty well defined. You already expect that the users might end up tapping on these pages. So they can go from page 1 to 2 to 3. We've got a pretty structured IA for our app or for our website, and we have the clear affordances. It's a very predictable path. With AI, each user can have a unique journey, and that's what makes it super complex, but also very, very interesting. So when you're designing for a situation where every user might end up having a different user experience and journey, how do you start thinking about defining that experience, right? What is your role in this whole process? Next slide, please. So your role as a product or design leader is going to evolve. And how do you start thinking about this? Your role becomes the enabler. You're trying to create a system which enables the user to interact with AI in a successful manner. And your role is then the role of training both the user and the AI to talk to each other, understand each other, and make sure that the experience overall is great, which is very different from my role is to build a path for the user to follow versus, hey, I don't know how you and you, Mr. AI, and you, Mr. User, are going to interact with each other, but my best guess is this, and I'm going to try and create the structure, create the training, create the affordances that both of you can have a great conversation, and it is helpful to the user in the end. And so start thinking about where training AI versus training the user, and how do you enable the user to be able to follow whatever is the most intuitive way for them to navigate this journey, is how you will start seeing the roles of product and design professionals evolve as they go deeper into the AI space. So I often share this with our Reforge participants as well. We often think of AI and anything that's futuristic, like something super out there, and it's very different. It's net new, and there's a lot of future forward thinking. But if you really look at AI today and the chatbots, co-pilot experiences that folks are building, if you can ground yourself in the foundations of human to human interaction, that's where you can create truly magical AI experiences. So it's very foundational. These forms of interactions that humans have had with each other haven't changed for thousands of years. And understanding that basic foundation will help you build truly great AI experiences. So how did we do this at Alexa? I just wanted to share a quick process flow. As a lead designer at Alexa, every project will start in this format for us. And this is just the design process. Just wanted to double click on this for your benefit. So you start with the user value customer problem. Amazon always started every process with the customer problem. You define what the golden occurrence is. So for one of the projects, we wanted to say, Alexa, give me an idea for X. And that would be a golden utterance. We want to train users to start using that utterance because it's easy to use and it just helps clarify the intention of the user. We're also training the AI at the same time, saying every time the user says, give me an idea for X, this is what you need to do. So going back to what I was saying, the role of the designer is helping train both AI and the user. Input variations, we talked about this. The user could come up with a query in any different way that they want to, different sentence structures, different words that they might use. So we would start every project with brainstorming as many input variations that we can come up with so that we can start training the AI in semantic relationships. Then we would define the dialogue flow and logic. So going back to what are the different paths the user could follow and how should we make sure that they have a clear path to switch or go deeper or just say, I'm done, I want to kind of wrap it up. So thinking about all the different possible scenarios, we would start the design process with a flow chart mostly. What are the ideal Alexa responses? So manually writing these off and then training the AI to replicate those, perfect responses. Thinking about failure cases and identifying what the soft landings are, and finally defining personality for each feature that we are launching. So this was a pretty standard process for any AI project that we picked up in Amazon Alexa. I'll pass it on to Polly from here.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Rupa. It was really enlightening. So while the UX process is changing significantly, particularly for these more conversational or adaptive interfaces that we're seeing within generative AI, so are the considerations about data and the engineering stacks that support these systems. So of course, for AI systems, AI data is more important than in traditional systems, just because while traditional systems still run on data, we usually ahead of time have decided the rules we want to use within that around that data by inspecting it, whereas AI systems are adapting based on patterns in the data, right? So I think of Alexa, we used to say, okay, here's how we want the conversation to go. Here's the options we're going to give to the user. If you have a purely LLM-based chatbot, you're not actually going to have that degree of control, right? You're still going to do that process so you can give the LLM a lot of examples of how you want the conversations to go, but you're not necessarily having that degree of control because it's all about what are the patterns in the data. So the key thing is the data that you're using really can make or break the user trust that they have in the system. And I wanted to look at three specific attributes of the data that are really important to take a look at. Specifically relevance, of course, you want, whatever the user is asking for, whatever they needs, you want the data to come back and actually provide that, right? And that's actually a little more complex than people think sometimes. Accuracy. Of course, we've all heard about hallucinations with LLMs, but is the information correct? It also needs to be up to date. So I've seen those challenges of keeping large language models up to date. A lot of teams are using augmented generation, where they're actually retrieving data offline, not from the LLM, and then inserting it into the prompt to keep models up to date. But that, again, brings back that question of, are they retrieving the right data? And is that data that they're retrieving from up to date as well, right? And finally, attribution. So is the source trustworthy, considered but trustworthy by users? I wanted to give an example. This isn't a real example of a real scenario, but in terms of the conversation, but it was a real feature. So when we were looking at Alexa, we were looking at answering questions from the web. We had a lot of long tail questions, we'll call it. So rare questions, not your typical, hey, what's the weather? Hey, what's the capital of Paris, but more like, what do bees have elbows, right? We have a lot of children who are asking questions of Alexa, and they are very imaginative. Questions that have never been asked before come up every day. We were looking to answer some of these questions from the web to be able to not have to, find all the answers ahead of time and put them in some kind of knowledge graph, etc. But when we ran into some questions, for example, things to do with people's health, we ran into some issues. So in this example, the hypothetical scenario was asking Alexa, hey, what should I take for a headache, right? And one of the answers that we were coming back as relevant, accurate, and attributed to a source was this: according to xyzgeocities.co.uk, oil pulling has many benefits, right? If you can see the problems with this answer in terms of being on brand for Alexa, right? Let's work backwards. First of all, the attribution, you can tell right away if you're asking a medical question and you'd expect maybe to get an answer from the web from, a known medical source, right? And instead we're getting it from some random website. We know people don't trust just random websites. And all of a sudden it makes it look like Alexa's untrustworthy just from the domain that it's using, right? The accuracy of whether oil pulling has benefits, that's hotly debated in the medical community. And then relevance. So this is another key piece. Technically, this is health advice. It's not completely irrelevant to the question, right? So the specificity of the user question has to be matched in the user answer as well to the right degree. So these are all considerations about to do with like the data you're using. Do you have a more specific answer than this to their question, or do you have to go more general? Even in retrieval augmented solutions, these are the more complex things we need to look at. Another key element now is that we're seeing that data is actually driving the UX interactions, even outside of conversational experiences. So some folks don't know that in movie making, particularly, I think Prime and Amazon have a patent in this space, but whenever you see a product placement, right, someone's drinking Coke or driving, has a specific watch or anything, right? More and more actors are now doing that piece with a green screen, right? So they can actually reuse that clip and put whatever brand is going to make the most sense. They don't have to have the brand deals ahead of shooting, but also they're able to like personalize that to your specific viewing, right? And in an age where we're able to create likenesses of people like we've seen in movies, voices, actually derive different scripts dynamically for different people, you can imagine that pretty soon the TV show that I watch and the TV show that you watch may be completely different, even if we're watching the same episode of the same show. And the only shared viewing experiences like movie theaters will actually be seeing the same thing. So take that analogy to software, right? So that's what's happening more and more is that as adaptive interfaces are emerging, when you see an interface, the order of the buttons may be different for you than from someone else. If you never actually use the talk button, that might not appear anymore, right? You might have to go buried in looking for it in the settings. So again, this is making the design angle, a lot more confusing, but it also means that as PMs, we need to be able to dig into the data to understand where these adaptive interfaces are working and where they're not working. And we're no longer thinking in segments anymore, right? This kind of user needs this interface. This kind of user needs this interface. Every single user is their own segment, right? So the complexities of understanding the feedback you're getting are a lot harder and more nuanced in that situation too. A key consideration as well, along with that, is that responsible AI, right? And that mitigating any biases in the data. It's not just a matter of design up front, right? So again, while we were looking to answer questions from the web, we had this escalation come up. I don't know if anyone remembers this particular headline from 2021. Alexa did, in fact, appear to tell a 10-year-old girl to touch a live plug with a penny. Now, no one was harmed in the story. This is still a fun webinar. Don't have to be sad. But the key here was that we had taken an answer from an online story about a terrible TikTok challenge. The story was decrying how terrible this TikTok challenge was, much like the Tide Pods challenge you might remember. Kids were taking videos daring each other to take a plug halfway out of the wall and touch a penny to one of the prongs. Well, when a child asked Alexa, hey, what's a fun challenge to try? We had excerpted just that one sentence describing the challenge and returned that. So it looked like Alexa was actually suggesting the challenge, right? So you can see how that mix of the UX, the data we had, the way where you were using it, ended up in this unexpected result, right? This wasn't a hallucination, and we didn't fail to retrieve the correct and relevant data, right? It was how we were using it and the response. So this can have results. Obviously, this would have had very negative results if anyone had been harmed. In our case, we had identified ahead of time through risk mitigation, risk identification, that our answers could potentially be taken out of context and have harmful outcomes. So we had guardrails in place ahead of launch so that people were monitoring the Reddit threads about Alexa does crazy things, and we were had all the customer support teams, et cetera, knew what to do if something like this came up. we could have an answer taken down within an hour. So this answer was taken down immediately within an hour once it was live, once it was public. It still made the news because, of course, that's how news works. But it was just interesting to see. We didn't face a lot of backlash with our leadership because we talked about how we were accepting these kinds of risks. Obviously, we hadn't anticipated something at this scale, but we knew how to deal with it, and we were prepped. We had prepped the PR team with reactive PR, et cetera, right? So we are dealing with so much more uncertainty in these systems that we need that degree of risk mitigation ahead of time, not just for harms as drastic as this, right? For things like, hey, are some particular groups getting worse outcomes than others, right? That's where the bias mitigation comes in. We need to be monitoring continuously that over time, our systems don't drift into more biased behavior or outcomes for our users. Another key distinction in AI systems is this improvement over time from user feedback, right? I've circled here at the bottom at ChatGPT. You may have noticed when you're using ChatGPT, you'll see it's got the little thumbs up, thumbs down for each one of its answers, right? So you can actually say, this conversation is helpful, it's going great. Many people think that they're using that feedback continuously, like they're immediately taking that and retraining the model, right? But training a model is actually a far too time and energy intensive piece to do that for every single user interaction, right? A lot of real-time training, actually adapting, the behavior as you go, might be done in session. With LLMs, you can do things like just looking at the context, including that in the context in the prompt, right? So you can rewrite the prompt to actually say, this was a particularly helpful answer. You gave this answer, but it was unhelpful, right? But the periodic updates are much more common, right? So you'll see that LLMs like OpenAI or companies like OpenAI will release periodic updates to their tools like ChatGPT, and you'll see their behavior change based on that. A key thing a lot of folks overlook is actually how much data you do need to retrain a model in the large, right? So like we said, individual session-based, hey, this person likes these kinds of answers, doesn't like these. That can be recorded somewhere as preferences, as long as you have a strong signal. But often for actually retraining the model, when to retrain it can be a really big problem, a really big distinction. We definitely had features within Alexa that we thought, oh, okay, we're going to get a continuous retraining loop. And then found out we were really not getting enough user data, even with the reach that Alexa has on particular features to actually make any difference to the underlying model. So it's really key to work with your data science teams ahead of time to understand, hey, let's plan for how often we need to retrain and how much data and feedback we need to make retraining worthwhile, since it's such an expensive endeavor. The engineering patterns underlying these systems are really changing, and that's key to know too. So the easiest thing right from the very beginning has been something where you don't need to actually take what the model outputs and put it live immediately, right? So that being able to, you can call that inference using the model, and offline is like not in real time back and forth with the user, right? And it was interesting to see in early 2023 that the explosion of chatbots was one of the major use cases everyone wanted to do, because it's actually one of the more complex use cases to use with generative AI. Because you're actually interacting real time and getting that inference in real time, the model has to be fast in order to be perceived as human-like in its responses, right? And for people not to get bored and wander away. Offline inference, a great example of folks who have done this. This is Amazon's generative AI customer reviews. If you've seen this, they will actually summarize all of the customer reviews in one short-ish soundbite, while also extracting kind of the main qualities that people are talking about in the reviews. So when you go to a product page on Amazon, they don't generate this for every time a person goes to a product page, right? Or update it. They've been generating this ahead of time and storing it. So it's very easy and cheap for them to serve it to you, right? The hardest kinds of systems are real-time systems where you're interacting, but then you need absolutely up-to-the-minute updated information, right? So if you wanted a real-time assistant to do something like proactively tell the user when something new happened in the world, right? Generally, we'd rely on some third-party system to do the proactivity piece and then actually have just the LLM as the conversational wrapper. So these systems are becoming more complex, and we're including not just LLMs, but more of the traditional AI systems, more of the traditional retrieval systems, in order to best balance between, this new creative element we've enabled with LLMs and the understanding, the semantic relationships, and the efficiency of existing tools that have been around, and we've been able to bring the costs down for a while. Awesome. So just to review some key takeaways, Rupa, do you want to go over yours really quick? I'll go over mine. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Absolutely, Polly. So just wanted to summarize what we discussed earlier. We need to reconsider our mental models as we think about building and designing for AI. Understanding human-to-human conversations and what makes it so great about human interactions, replicating that into your AI experience would truly create some delightful experiences. And think about what your role is in this process and how you might want to prepare yourself so that you can set yourself up for success as you start navigating this world. Those would be, my message to the team.
Fantastic. And yeah, my key takeaways really are that quality of the data is so, so important in AI systems. Being able to dive deep into and see around corners with your team is a key skill. And those responsible AI considerations are just table stakes now for everyone who's building with AI. They are not optional. Learning is something that is often pitched as like the big advantage of a new AI system, but it is more complex to implement than it sounds. And then engineering patterns are shifting and becoming more complex than simply let's use an LLM. So it's key to keep up with those advancements as we're going along. If you'd like to learn more, we'd love to have you join us. We have a course called Generative AI Products, How to Get from Idea to MVP. So if you are at the early stages of, I have something, I want to know how to understand the value it's going to bring, what's real, what's science fiction in AI today, and actually get hands-on implementing your own, prototype, most valuable or most lovable product. That's what this course is designed to do. It's 3 2-hour sessions. The next session is happening starting off May 3rd. So it's 3 Fridays, 9 to 11 a.m. And we cover both the design aspect, so the define aspect, so defining what is going to make a valuable AI prototype or project, design, where Rupa goes over in depth the conversational and generative AI design patterns you need to know, and deploy, where I go over how to build prototypes with today's no code tools, no coding required, along with deployment considerations to get to launch. We also have another session starting in June if those dates in May don't work for you. So if you're interested in the June session, please do shoot us an email at support@aicareerboost.com. And finally, I'd love to encourage you all to follow us on LinkedIn. Both Rupa and I are active on LinkedIn, where we're constantly sharing what we can about AI, how it's different for product and design managers and leaders. We'd love to have you follow us along. Anything you wanted to add, Rupa, before we kick to questions?
No, I think we're good. I've been trying to address as many questions offline as possible. So yeah, let's jump to it.
Awesome.
Great, we can get started. Thank you both for this really great presentation. Really excited to dive into all the questions. We received a bunch. So just a reminder for everyone, if there's a question you want Pauline Rupa to answer, please use the vote, like the little thumb. This is going to help us prioritize because I'm not sure we'll have time to cover all of them. So the first one that got 25 votes is from Eduardo. So I have seen a recent explosion of chatbots as the UX choice to leverage AI. Is there any research around how effective a chatbot is as a UX and how it's perceived by different types of end users? And Megan had like a follow-up question to this and was interested on how to best evaluate the interface. Interestingly, we removed and changed the chat interface. I can take the same.
Maybe I'll talk a little bit about the chatbot as an interface overall, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about evaluating interfaces, Rupa. Does that sound good?
Sure.
So definitely we've seen a lot of people adopting chat interfaces without any evidence that that is what users want. right? And I think that was definitely the trend in a lot of, especially early 2023. There was a lot of top-down initiatives where we're getting just like, we need a chatbot, we need a chatbot. It took a while for people to recognize that with the explosive adoption of ChatGPT, in that case, the chat interface had helped people understand and play around with generative AI, but those weren't necessarily that isn't necessarily the interface for every use case, right? So the question about, oh, is this the best use case? There's no one size fits all answer to whether chatbots are good or bad. They're the best thing, they're not. If you have a particular use case, you need to evaluate it for that with your users. I'm excited because we're seeing more and more of a blending of different interfaces. So instead of your old traditional UX that you had, and then we pop a chatbot in the corner, it's been like the key thing that a lot of kind of the anti-pattern that a lot of companies were doing. We're seeing this blending of the interfaces where there's generative features that are in context menus, right? If you look at Notion, they've got features like this. Or the Microsoft Copilots, where they're actually helping you interact with different parts of the tools, not just through the chat interface. And so that, I think the two areas are really merging, and the UXs are getting a little more sophisticated. So I hope that helps. And then to be able to understand what will work for your users, you do need to be able to really get good at user testing and evaluation.
I'll give an example from Microsoft, maybe that will help. So Microsoft came up with a design principle that says we might have AI assist users in different ways. One of them would be a full takeover. It's a chatbot, and there are specific use cases where it makes sense. In another scenario, we could have something like a side panel where the chatbot is more subtle and available as you need it, but that's not your core interface. And the third area would be to just seed the current experience with AI generated insights and helpful features. So it is embedded and integrated into your current UX. So we are seeing a lot of these, what Polly call blended experiences. And you might have use cases where you might just need an entire independent chatbot, depending on what your use case is. Right.
Thank you both. Okay, the next question that got most upvotes is how can we evaluate an AI product idea and whether it's worth investing resources or not? And there was like kind of like a follow-up question to this, and similar to this, how can we evaluate if AI is the best solution or may not be the right solution to solve a specific problem?
Yeah, I love this question. I know Rupa does too. Rupa, do you want to start or?
Yeah, I can maybe kick us off. I think this is the crux of the course that we just showed you. We really want folks to think about this deeply before you jump onto the AI bandwagon. And so thinking of a couple of somebody in the group has asked questions about jobs to be done. What are your users' jobs to be done? And can AI be the best solution? Thinking about, are you trying to reduce friction in the current process? Are you able to generate 10x value? Like, why do you want to use AI here? And how does it map to the current jobs to be done? So if you do some early prototypes and user testing and you're not seeing strong traction, you're not seeing good feedback, then you know that, hey, AI might not be the best solution here. You don't have to write a single line of code to validate whether AI is the right solution for your product.
Exactly. And then I think when the key piece is understanding the feasibility element, right? That's where, so if you know you have a user pain point and you've mapped this to some new capabilities that are only possible through AI, no unnecessary AI, please. The key of mapping feasibility and cost, right, are the next level. So that does take a more detailed examination of what you're trying to do. And that's a lot of what we do in the course, right? So not only do we go through the pitfalls and things that are not working today with LLMs and things that are still like in process and progress versus things that are, easy, simple to do. But we're also looking at ROI and how to figure out the costs. In general, a lot of really complex tasks or things that require things like, chat with your data kind of use cases. Some of those examples are feasible, but the folks who are actually able to do those reliably enough for user interaction, and especially at scale for enterprises, have been able to do it with like ChatGPT, GPT-4, like the most advanced third-party models, which are expensive. So a lot of places are in the process of trying to figure out, okay, we got this working with these third-party models, but we can't run it at those costs. Can we get the open source models to behave this way and actually do the engineering and hacking we need to get those costs down while still getting the performance that we need?
Thank you both. Okay, the next question we had is so regarding AI product design. So if you take an age-related demographic and personas, what different and additional consideration should we consider while designing AI product for either children or for seniors?
Another great question. Of course, first and foremost, there's legal considerations for different age groups. So specifically for children, there's definitely a lot more concern around the permission for children to be using elements. There are regulations you need to be in compliance with in terms of both, getting permission from their parents, but also the privacy and security of their data is obviously paramount, right? So that's just a footnote before we get into the UX. I think there's, it's like with any user, right? That as opposed to thinking in segments like that now, we're now thinking, hey, we may have someone who is 25 who browses like an 80-year-old, right? Things like that, right? We're no longer looking at those kind of demographic things as necessarily the only indicator. The adaptive UX to their capabilities is the key piece, and that's where that personalization comes in. Any further thoughts, Rupa?
No, I think you covered it pretty elegantly.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, next question with most upvotes is from Shirley. So LLMs like GPT-4 are generated models and black boxes, which can create deep-rooted usability problems in chat interfaces. How can we guide users without turning them into prompt engineers?
I love the framing of this question. That's great.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's awesome. That's a complex problem for sure. I think if you look around some of the examples of how folks are implementing, perplexity is one of my favorite, examples recently. You want to provide some level of affordances. So you preempt, hey, here's what you could do next. Here's how you could frame. In our course, we cover the entire end-to-end, set of components. So think of starter prompts. Starter prompts are pre-formed queries that you're offering the user and say, here are a few ways you can form this query. We used to do that in Alexa, and trust me, it was very hard to do that in voice as well. But that's been a very tried and tested way of helping the users understand this is the way I could engage with this AI, right? And once the AI has responded, then you could pre-can some of the responses so the user is not trying to rewrite the prompt over again, but they're just saying, now I want to do this, or this is what I would like to ask for. And preempting those contextually. LinkedIn has launched a very cool feature recently where if you're looking at a webinar or you're looking at a post, they have these little snippets at the bottom that just tell you, here's the question you can ask. So there's so many different ways you can start with that. Notion, for example, just has buttons that say, I want this blog post to get shorter or longer or more casual or more professional. And so you could try some of these, I'm calling them hacks, but they are just tried and tested mechanisms of reducing that load on the user and be able to communicate easily with the AI that this is what I'm looking for. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Rupa. Okay, next question from Harsha. What are some AI product-related UX consideration that can help build trust with users and have explainability of data usage and insights, action available to the end user when needed?
Yeah, there's a lot. So one of the pieces that I mentioned as I was going was attribution, right? So explaining to users where the data came from can actually be a really big piece. And then we also considered like, hey, how are we going if we're summarizing information, right? When we started actually changing what we're pulling out of a website, so we don't end up with issues like we did with the children touching prongs with pennies. We wanted to adapt it for audio, etc. Actually being able to explain to the user like, hey, this is a summarized answer. AI was used, right? There's could be subtle clues, like we were talking about just using like a sound or something that's like, ding, ding, this is a summarized answer, right? And reminding people that this is something where we have processed the data. We are responsible for that piece of it. Because I think people to trust that data need to know not only where it comes from, but like, hey, who's going to take accountability if it's wrong, misinformation, who's going to provide that clarity about what you have done with the data besides just repurposing it.
Thank you, Polly. Okay, the next question with 9 votes is from Leah. It's a long question. I understand that unlike traditional workflow, AI workflows are more varied since they are unique to each user. But isn't the product role at the end of the day to converge all these paths to the handful of offerings the company has as for the user? It is, after all, not an infinite set of data, action, services that we can offer the user. Whatever the user asks for, we would ultimately need to get to the point that we deliver something of value as a result. And these value propositions are finite and clearly detriment. I don't know how to say this word, detriment. Detriment. Thank you.
It's very dependent on your use case, right? So, but I do agree that there's a lot of systems where your goal is actually to guide the user to a decision, for example, in a shopping UX or things like that. You're not going to like make up new products because they asked for a teddy bear with a hat on it or something like that, right? Um, the key here is that balance between the flexibility you want to have and where you want to have control, right? So if you have a purely LLM-based system, it's very hard to maintain an exact degree of control over the conversational flow, over where the users are going or where they end up at the final stage of the conversation. That's really why we're seeing people build more of these hybrid systems where they still have points in the conversation where the options are very narrow, choose A or B, these kinds of things, right? So that's a lot of the deploy session in our course is going over, hey, how do we integrate old school NLU style chat operations where we had to just specify exactly what people might say and how we would respond to every single utterance, versus LLMs, kind of the Wild West. It could do anything. Of course, we have prompting, to keep it within its guardrails, but sometimes that's not enough. In between, we have hybrid systems, which is really where the most advanced chatbots are being developed.
Thank you, Polly. Okay, next question is from Gavin. Is there a possibility that UI of the future is just a text box for the majority of software applications?
Hey, Gavin, I'm going to ask you a question right back. Why do we even need a text box? Why can AI not be super, transient, ambient? You're just speaking out your questions aloud and it's doing what you're asking it to do. Just kidding, but we've always thought about an ambient, intelligent, AI system that you don't need screens for. That would be pretty magnificent.
I think as these systems are becoming more autonomous, right? Right now, if you're doing something like filling out a form or something that's like repetitive, you've done it a bunch of times, actually typing out the information might be more of a pain in the butt than actually clicking, selecting, right? Like we do in traditional UX. But if you can think of like, hey, the goal is fill out this form for me. You already know my information. Then as soon as we're moving into this more goal-oriented space, maybe we don't need a lot of the UX clicking and poking and prodding that we're doing today for many, many tasks. Of course, this is balanced with our need for privacy, right? How much information do we want these systems to have to be able to do things on our behalf?
Thank you, Polly. Okay, next question is another question from Harsha. What is an effective approach to crafting jobs to be done for conversational AI flows? I find this to be rather difficult since it is hard to anticipate what the users want to be what the user want to be get done with a general conversational AI flow as opposed to a menu-based a menu-based conversational AI flow.
Yeah, I can take that. Hey, Harsha, good to have you in the program again. I think if you are having trouble trying to map the user's jobs to be done in an open-ended conversational AI interface, then maybe it's not the best fit. So I'll start with that. But it should not be such that you're not able to define the core jobs to be done. Once you have done that, then trying to take the approach of a more menu-based, conversational experience versus an open-ended, I think that's a matter of what your use case is and what you're trying the user to get done, right? I'll just use an example of maybe booking a trip, right? That is something that maybe it's more suited for a navigation-based approach rather than an open-ended approach. But if somebody is trying to learn something, it's an educational use case, then an open-ended approach makes a lot more sense. So it depends on your use case. You should not have any difficulty in mapping the core jobs to be done, but then you have a lot of choices whether you want to have what we call a more structured approach to conversational AI versus a more open-ended approach. And if you go back to the Microsoft example, do I need an open-ended chatbot where the user can type anything to get this job to be done versus maybe it's a side panel and there are few options which are relevant to what the user wants to get done. So there's no reason why you can't go into the more structured direction if that's what helps the user to complete the task at hand better. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Rupa. The next question we got, how do you monitor for billions of interactions to search for bias, irrelevant, or inaccurate responses?
Yeah, the key piece here is that a big difference in traditional systems and AI systems is like we're no longer taking the goal of zero errors, whether that's zero biased answers, zero incorrect answers, right? When we're dealing with AI systems in general, we're dealing with, hey, there's going to be some percentage, let's see how small we can make it, where it's doing something unpredictable, right? And so that has been one of the biggest risks that teams are grappling with. They're trying to reduce these like hallucination rates, et cetera, to acceptable levels, and especially the things that are going to have the biggest potential negative impacts. So this becomes very much a data science and statistics exercise, right? Where you're looking for what are our signals of incorrect or biased information, and then how do we monitor those signals over those billion use cases, right? So let me give you an example. For Alexa Q&A, we often had something that we would ask for feedback afterwards for an audio device where we would say, hey, was that helpful? You can't ask a user every time they ask a question, hey, is that helpful? Without annoying them very quickly. So it was something that there was an adjustable rate for feedback. But in general, we were monitoring. If people were saying no more than yes, then that's a signal like, hey, overall, we're getting less correct in our answers. That kind of thing. So there's signals like user feedback that we use for proxies. We would also take samples of the data and have it evaluated, right? Manually annotated, looking for biased or unacceptable answers, brand damaging answers. The move now has been more away from human annotation and getting like large language models to do the annotation, but then there's a whole check that the large language models are doing that part correctly as well, but it is because human annotation is really expensive. This whole evaluation piece can be a really big part of the expense of a system.
Thank you, Polly. I
Hey,
think
Eleanor, I saw a couple
yeah,
of questions around semantic relationships. I think, Polly, we should address
go for
those.
it.
I've seen multiple folks ask that question.
Sure.
And I don't know if you've seen these, Polly, but they're basically, the questions are related to, don't LLMs address these semantic relationships and how do we build that in, right? So
Exactly. So when Rupa was talking about this, it's one of the big advantages of LLMs is that traditional NLU systems, they didn't necessarily know that when I say find me versus search for versus get me, that I meant the same thing, right? So that is the trade-off, is that semantic understanding comes built in as part of the LLMs. But there's a lot of big trade-offs, right? So that control that we have over the system and how it behaves, where it goes in the conversation, exactly which items it's recommending, if it's recommending things that we don't have, as well as that visibility into how it's working under the hood. Traditionally, we've had multiple models interacting. So one model deciding what the intent was, and another model extracting exactly what, oh, find me shoes. The intent is find. The object is shoes, right? And we were able to inspect that if there's, issues or problems and actually adjust each of these models individually. So LLMs are a lot less work to set up. And that semantic understanding is the piece that people are most interested in taking advantage of, because that was such a big challenge before. So we need to use them appropriately in the systems where that semantic understanding is, to our advantage and worth the cost versus traditional systems.
Thank you both. I think we're getting to the top of the hour. Any last words you wanted to say?
Thanks so much for the engaged questions. It's always great to have a group, especially it's early here on the West Coast. So we appreciate you joining us so early and coming engaged and thoughtful. Really great questions today. I really hope you'll join us. I know our course, we've really had such engaged folks come join us, get their hands on, which I really believe is the best way to learn about AI. So hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for the amazing questions, folks, and joining us. We've tried to address as much as we could, but if there's any pressing questions, feel free to find us on LinkedIn. We're happy to address your questions there as well.